At 8:45 a.m. on January 20th, 1953, the morning of the presidential inauguration, Dwight David Eisenhower, President-elect, national hero, and commander of Allied victory in Europe, sat stiffly in the back seat of a limousine parked outside the north portico of the White House. The air was cool at 49 degrees, the sky a flat gray. Inside, President Harry S. Truman waited by a window, expecting to greet his successor as tradition required. Yet Eisenhower did not move, not even to walk the short distance to the door. He would not enter the White House as a guest. He would not sit for coffee. He would not follow the ritual that symbolized continuity in American government. Instead, he waited, forcing Truman to come out to him. Those who witnessed it knew instantly that this was no scheduling confusion. It was a deliberate slight at the very moment when the peaceful handover of power was meant to embody national dignity. CBS correspondent Eric Severard later captured the mood with 3 words: a shocking moment. The scene was the culmination of a relationship that had once been anchored in respect. Truman, the plain-spoken Missourian who had ascended from farm life to the presidency, had placed extraordinary trust in the general from Kansas. Eisenhower, for his part, had long benefited from Truman's confidence and support. Yet by the morning of the inauguration, the distance between them was more than physical. It was emotional, political, and deeply personal. To understand the rift, one must return to July 1945. Truman, newly thrust into the presidency after Franklin Roosevelt's death, was still carving out his leadership in a world reeling from global war. On a drive through the shattered remains of Berlin during the Potsdam Conference, Truman turned to Eisenhower and offered him something unprecedented: whatever he desired, up to and including the presidency itself. Truman believed Eisenhower embodied the leadership America admired: sober, disciplined, victorious. He even suggested again in 1947 that if Eisenhower wanted the White House, Truman would gladly step aside and serve as his vice president. Truman confided the offer privately in his diary, emphasizing how serious and sincere it was. But Eisenhower declined, insisting he had no political ambitions and no desire to participate in partisan battles.
For years afterward, their relationship remained cordial and productive. Truman made Eisenhower Army Chief of Staff, honored him with multiple Distinguished Service Medals, and later appointed him the first Supreme Commander of NATO. They worked together with mutual respect, even if they were not personally close. But the seeds of tension were planted. Truman's offers now looked, in hindsight, like a kind of emotional and political investment that Eisenhower would later seem to abandon. The breaking point emerged in 1952. After years of claiming he had no intention of entering politics, Eisenhower announced he would run for president, not as a Democrat, as Truman had wished, but as a Republican candidate opposing Truman's own party. To Truman, the breach felt personal. He had trusted Eisenhower, elevated him, and even contemplated yielding the presidency to him. To see Eisenhower now seeking the office from the opposing political camp struck Truman as an act of ingratitude, or worse, opportunism. Yet even this was not what finally destroyed their relationship. The true fracture centered on one man, General George C. Marshall. Marshall, one of the most influential military leaders in American history, had shaped the U.S. Army, orchestrated victory in World War II, and designed the Marshall Plan that restored Europe after the war. He had been Eisenhower's mentor, the person who had recognized his talent early, promoted him rapidly, and ultimately placed him in command of the D-Day invasion. Without Marshall, Eisenhower's rise would have been unthinkable. Despite this towering legacy, Marshall found himself the target of vicious attacks during the early 1950s. Senator McCarthy, capitalizing on the hysteria of the Red Scare, accused Marshall of being part of a communist conspiracy. In a 60,000-word tirade, McCarthy suggested that Marshall was responsible for losing China to communism, undermining U.S. interests, and serving as a secret traitor within the government. Fellow Republican Senator William Jenner echoed these baseless attacks, calling Marshall a living lie. These accusations were not policy disagreements. They were character assassinations against a man who had devoted his life to serving the country.
Truman was furious. He believed Marshall to be the finest public servant alive, calling him the greatest living American. And he expected Eisenhower, of all people, to defend the man who had shaped his career and life. The opportunity came in October 1952. Eisenhower was scheduled to give a major campaign speech in Milwaukee, McCarthy's political stronghold. His team prepared remarks that included a firm, heartfelt defense of Marshall's loyalty and patriotism. The paragraph was brief, direct, and powerful. It had been released to the press beforehand, raising expectations for a dramatic repudiation of McCarthy's slanders. It would have been a defining moment of moral courage. Eisenhower, the nation's most respected soldier, standing up for his old commander against a reckless demagogue. But Eisenhower's advisers urged him to remove the passage. They feared offending McCarthy and alienating Wisconsin voters. They warned him it could cost valuable electoral support. Eisenhower, focused on winning the presidency, reluctantly agreed. He deleted the defense. That night, he delivered his speech with McCarthy on stage beside him, praised McCarthy's anti-communist efforts, and never once mentioned George Marshall. To Truman, it was unforgivable. Eisenhower had owed Marshall his career, and in the face of political convenience, he had remained silent. Truman believed Eisenhower had compromised his integrity to avoid confronting McCarthyism. He believed Eisenhower had refused to defend a friend, mentor, and national hero when it mattered most. In Truman's mind, this wasn't mere disagreement, it was a betrayal. From that moment forward, Truman considered Eisenhower's presidential campaign an assault on everything he valued: loyalty, courage, and moral clarity. Eisenhower, for his part, believed Truman had grown overly partisan and erratic, particularly in the final years of his presidency. Mutual respect curdled into resentment.
By Inauguration Day 1953, the relationship was beyond repair. Thus the image: Eisenhower in the car, refusing to enter the White House. Truman watching from inside with wounded pride. The distance between them had been years in the making, but on that cold January morning, it played out in a gesture that defined their final break. What had begun as one of the most promising political friendships in American history ended as a silent standoff at the threshold of the White House. Their story serves as a reminder of how political life can strain even the strongest alliances, how personal loyalty can be overshadowed by ambition, and how fractured trust can overshadow even the most honorable intentions. It showed that history is not only shaped by battles, policies, and elections, but also by human emotions, pride, disappointment, and the sense of betrayal that can turn allies into adversaries. Eisenhower and Truman would eventually speak again years later after the wounds had cooled. But on January 20th, 1953, all their shared history, wartime cooperation,